Today on the show, we've got Bryan Lee. Bryan is a sourcer and the co-founder of Subgraph. He's worked at companies like Sequoia Capital, Uber, Apple, Google. Bryan is one of those brilliant sourcing minds that is all over the internet right now with some incredible takes around the future of sourcing.
It's not all just about, can we build this AI agent to do all of our sourcing? It's really looking at what does a recruiter do throughout their day that's repetitive, that we can make more efficient, and how do we take advantage of that?
What do you think is different about startup hiring, and can you relate to that wanting to be impactful?
We're seeing some of people really drive into this AI sourcing space. I think at the end of the day, though, is does it make me more efficient? Am I making more hires? Am I saving more time?
What's up, everybody? Today on the show, we've got Bryan Lee. Bryan is a sourcer and the co-founder of Subgraph. He's worked at companies like Sequoia Capital, Uber, Apple, Google. Bryan is one of those brilliant sourcing minds that is all over the internet right now with some incredible takes around the future of sourcing. So Bryan, I had to chat with you. Welcome to the show.
I appreciate it. I'm excited to share. I think we're seeing sourcing starting to move so quickly, right? What can we automate? What can we throw some of this tooling at? We even talked about some of these talent engineering roles. I love where it's going.
Well, yeah, me too. When we think about where it's going, it's almost like the mainstream recruiting world is catching up with where maybe a small percentile of folks were a couple years back. As soon as we got some of those SDR tools, automation, doing some talent mapping, talent intelligence with some LLMs. How are you building Subgraph, and what is Subgraph all about?
Sure, a lot of it is just finding the efficiencies in our workflow. And I think what I've learned over the last 4 years, so I was at Sequoia Capital and I saw their investment into, can we build tools to help us be more efficient? They're building them for the investors. A lot of the recruiting tooling and needs were a bit similar. So I saw how they were thinking about it and just the space they gave us to build for ourselves. And then for our portfolio companies, were there any solutions that we could build internally that would really help our founders? So I really took that mindset after I left Sequoia. I had the dream to build a search firm and just wanted to see if I could spin up my own business and support my own customers. So I launched a search firm called Narwhal Search. And we're essentially just your traditional search firm, partnering with startups and seeing if we could help them hire. We did that for a couple of years with some success. One of the engineering leaders I partnered with at Sequoia left his company and circled back, and we started having conversations about he was already going down the route of building AI agents, and could you leverage that in recruiting? So we've essentially just been like a high-powered search firm that's leveraging as much tooling as we can. So he builds our platform, played around with market mapping, but we're probably doing a lot of the things that other companies are doing. I think for us, it's just kind of taking it a step forward as not just being like, great, we're going to use the latest and greatest technologies. For us, it's really going to be part of our ethos and drive what we're doing is, can we build efficiency into everything we've done? One thing we're playing with right now is how do we speed up some middles? Right. So it's not all just about, can we build this AI agent to do all of our sourcing? It's really looking at what does a recruiter do throughout their day that's repetitive, that we can make more efficient, and how do we take advantage of that?
Yeah, I love that. And I love the freedom that you were given to explore at Sequoia Capital. A lot of folks, when they look up to people in the industry who are on the talent side at a venture fund, that's like dream job, best case scenario, and have the opportunity to support so many early stage startups. I love early stage startup hiring and recruiting, despite how volatile it is. I just love the idea of being a problem solver. You need your first VPE, you need your first VP sales, you need a DevOps person, you need a really strong customer success person who can drive revenue, you need a RevOps or go-to-market engineer. Getting into the product side, like somebody who's built a cool product and somebody's like, oh, I kind of like how that looked. And it's like, cool, I'll go find them. I love being the solution. What do you think is different about startup hiring, and can you relate to that wanting to be impactful that drives me?
Yeah, I haven't been in late stage in a while now, it seems, which is funny, right? Maybe I'm 10 years from even being at Uber. And so it feels like mostly what I know is early stage. One is just you don't have the resources. You don't have 15 people around you that you can ask and send work. Hey, can you handle this part? You take on this part. It's kind of just like, hey, here's a problem. You need to solve it end to end. So I think what it's really helped with me is really just get visibility in what we run into day to day as a recruiter. And a lot of it's a context switching, right? Is that I go from sourcing on a DevOps role to closing a product manager to helping a hiring manager build an interview process. And then if you think about our screens, right, I go from my calendar, I go from Gmail to LinkedIn to if you're using any of the AI tools, your different ATS, your Slack, right? So we're just spending so many time jumping into different directions. That's why for me, it was a little bit more like, how do we make sure that we're building some of those efficiencies? And that's where I really started to get intrigued. And that's why I kind of completely jumped into building a company with one other person. So it's me and my CTO, and it's truly just we're bootstrapped. But I really like that we saw a problem that it's really tough for early stage companies to hire. And we're really standing at how do we solve that the most efficient way, right? There's a lot of great solutions. There's MetaView really helped with calendar, like with note taking. We use Granola. There's some great options of like whether it's AI note taking. We're seeing some of people really drive into this AI sourcing space. I think at the end of the day, though, is does it make me a more efficient? Am I making more hires? Am I saving more time? And I think that they're heading in the direction to think through those things. I think what's really tough in recruiting those, we all have different flows. The way that I interact and I find candidates is going to look completely than the way you do. So how do you build a workflow that solves that? But yeah, we've gone down that rabbit hole. And I think like you, it's just waking up with something that you're so passionate to solve. That's why you join a startup, right? Because you want to be able to grab it and fix it versus something just like a bigger machine, right? Nothing wrong with it. Just like I think people explain it as like being the cog in the wheel versus I want it to be the whole car.
Yeah. When you were at Uber, did you work with Eric Stradley and Aaron Fagan and all those folks?
I know the name Aaron Fagan, but I don't know them. I was there in I think 2013, but Richard Dietrich, Jonathan Leiden was my manager, Rosalind Rattan and Cassie Chow were on my team, Brian Bocchino. What's interesting is I only worked at Uber for a year, but I'd probably say it's driven so many of my connections. It actually motivated me to launch my search firm. I was seeing a lot of my ex-Uber employees kind of branch out everywhere. And I was like, I've got this great network. I had hired a friend into one of our portfolio companies in an executive role from Uber. And I was like, oh, like there's something there that like my network is somewhat of the gold in this. So my Uber connections were very much a driver. And honestly, like I could probably point to some of my best customers and they're probably connections I made from Uber.
Yeah, I think that is the key exactly for folks going out on their own and knowing if you're ready to stand up a business based on your own like household economics and what you need to make as a recruiter. But if you're trying to go out there and like bill a million, the way to do it is like work and track the people that you've served in the past. And I think when you give great service internally, but also act strategically, so those folks that you're working with that are hiring managers at the VP level, give them a little strategy, give them a little pushback. They don't want every submit to be like, oh my God, this is the person. Like, just shoot it straight. And I think that's what I see in successful former in-house recruiters that go out on their own and figure out how to bill a million and run a real successful agency. So it's cool to hear that you've done that. And now to hear that you're building a product. I like that you talk about the product being for your workflow. I'm a big believer recruiting is not one size fits all, nor is the technology. What we're seeing in B2B SaaS is your tech stack is like a lifestyle purchase. People want to know what tools are you using? What's the cool and emerging software? The reality is one person's tech stack may not be the best tech stack for another person's workflow. So when I see all these emerging vendors, it's like, that's great. We've got more market. The use case you're building is around your workflow. Can you talk a little bit about your workflow and what that means specifically as a startup search firm?
Sure. You got to kind of think about my flow, right? I just met with one of my friends. I used to work at an ML driven hedge fund. He works at a hedge fund and said, hey, Brian, I've got a software engineering role with they need somebody that has data platform experience. I've got 4 candidates in play. If you can get some great candidates in play, we'd love to consider them, right? And like with search firms, like now it becomes a bit of a race, right? When you're an internal recruiter, it's like great, you take your time. When you make a hire, great, but you're not quite like racing and your paycheck's dependent on you winning. So for us, it's often speed. They have 3 other agencies they work with. So how fast can I go from somebody giving me something like a job description to candidates that are ready to interview? But we're not hiring for contract roles. These aren't volume hires. These are top of the line hedge funds. They're looking for the best talent in the world. So for us, it's a little bit like, how do we quickly take a job description or a ask from a hiring manager, make sure that we have context on what their role looks like. How do we understand what the market for that looks like? How do we interact with those candidates as quickly as possible? How do we chat with them and then screen and then introduce them to a customer, right? So you really have to smash that together. So we put a lot of thought into is to market mapping, right? Can I build a system where can we run concurrent Boolean searches? I need to find a backend engineer in San Francisco with this skill, but that's built data platforms before. How do I grab every backend engineer that has data platform experience, find a way to interact with them, get them in, if the ones that it's relevant for, reach out to them with thoughtful messaging, and then help them through our interview process. So a lot of it still goes to how do we make a hire? It's not so much, hey, I'm here to present 15 beautiful profiles to you, and then now you go and interact with them. We need to introduce people that we've spoken to and that are warm leads. So
Yeah.
what I really needed was a solution that could help me go from job description to candidates. The rest of it doesn't matter, right? I think there's a lot of solutions that are like, hey, we'll show you 50 candidates. Great. I already know how to find the 50 candidates. I need a way that I can interact with them a lot faster. So for us, it's like you talked about my workflow is that speed becomes so much part of this when you are a small search firm. And it depends, right? Sometimes it's really like, how do we make sure that we have enough information and we've done enough research about what a market looks like for a specific role. So for us, it's really just like, how can we take a step back and really think through like what in my workflow causes me the most time, takes the most time. So often like my CTO will message me and say, hey, I've looked at your calendar. I see that you're doing this over and over again. Like I built this. What's awesome is when Tucker first started with Subgraph, he was taking 50 calls a week with candidates and submitting them. And then after a while, he's like, oh man, it takes 5 to 10 minutes to submit each candidate. Can we build something that speeds that up? So things like that, right? Like at like what takes the time of a recruiter, whether it's research, whether it's reaching out to candidates, whether it's marketing or market mapping and finding those candidates. And I think what's different, we may talk about it in a bit, but we're seeing these talent engineering roles. And even what I did with that Sequoia is that what I also saw is that because of companies have up to focus on their core business product, their engineering leaders aren't focused on building a recruiting product. And I think we're starting to see it like with Juicebox. They're investing in building out technical teams to solve this challenge. I think when you're looking at an internal team and building, say, asking for a talent engineer, what I do get concerned about is like, all right, now you're asking for somebody with a recruiting background to build a platform or a system that's reliable. What happens when something goes wrong? Are they now going to spend 3 hours troubleshooting this system? I think the difference between me and a talent engineer is I've got a CTO that's working on these systems 15 hours a day. And I think that's probably, but I love that like other people are exploring in the space. I think we will start to see more commitments, right? I think we just saw Quantum just hired an engineering leader, right? Like we're starting to see it really start to come into play with companies asking like, how can they inject AI into their flows? And honestly, like Quantum solution is going to look completely different than what mine is, right? Because they have 50 recruiters, they have different set of challenges. So I think this talent engineering role, this injection of AI is going to look different for everybody.
Yeah, 100%. What I find interesting about it is when you look at the profile, like if you look at the JD from AirOps, Viet Nguyen's talent engineer, much of the profile is actually the technical co-founder of a sourcing tools profile. So then you have these sourcing startups, which at this point are like a dime a dozen. I get hit up by 5 to 7 a month where they're AI sourcing and they want my feedback. Those very early stage pre-seed companies are them building and watching internal talent teams just build this stuff. And what's fascinating is a couple of things. One, it goes to show how simple recruiting tech has been to date. A lot of it is CRUD software, like CRUD, the acronym. And now we have internal teams building for themselves, but it removes a accountability layer. So if you're an in-house recruiting team and you're going to vibe code your own tools instead of going to market and buying something, I don't know a single enterprise like company that wouldn't throw their vendor under the bus or admit that they enjoy using vendors for a specific reason around compliance, around accountability, around potential litigation from the EEOC. So it's one thing to vibe code sales tools and you come into considerations like GDPR and SOC 2 and PII data.
Yep.
But it's a little bit different when it comes down to automated decision systems and how that's not currently defined, but then also vibe coding tools that involve other types of regulatory and compliance risk like EEOC.
Yep.
So that's a big one that I don't see enough people talking about. We can talk all about talent engineering, but I want to hit that first. What is just your take of that idea and concept around build or buy?
Yeah, I think you have to think about time, right? I think that's what it comes down to, right? I was just chatting with Kevin Lee. He's a technical recruiter at Liquid AI, and he's crushing building some of the awesome tooling that really supports their workflow. And I think what's awesome is that they've given him the space to explore some of these solutions, right? But then, like you talked about, what happens if it takes him 3 hours to troubleshoot something that breaks? Or as you build this, does it truly work in your workflow, right? There's another layer to the thought that I think a lot of us are like, great, we can vibe code these solutions, but we're not product managers, right? What we're not thinking about is I'm used to going to LinkedIn Recruiter, sending messages, checking my email right now to manage this solution you built. And then what happens if it doesn't get the results you're looking for? Like you talked about, what if there's security issues? What if there's a data leak? Right? There's massive repercussions that do come with this. But I think we're still so early. And a lot of the companies, if you're building this internally, I think you're a little less concerned because you're not selling a product. So you're not quite playing that game yet. But yeah, I like it. I just think that we do have to be thoughtful of like, all right, so you do build this solution that helps yourself find a few more profiles, but does it help you make a hire at the end of the month? Because at the end of the day, what happens if you spent 6 months building these solutions that don't land on why you're generating hires, right? You can build this market mapping tool, and then you make your next 6 hires on referrals. And it's like, all right, what are you spending your time doing? We're still 6 hires behind. So I think it's going to be a balance of like, teams are going to run leaner, but we still need results today. How much of that time is being spent building out technology, and when does it start to get the results we need? So that's going to be a question I think we're going to see hit ahead, like maybe towards the end of the summer and next year of everybody's building vibe tools and are you making hires from it. And that's why when we launched, I really wanted to, we do a bit more of a contained agreement now. When we launched, we just did contingent because I really wanted to make sure that our solution was hiring. Like, none of this matters if I wasn't making hires for it. And I wanted to see if I can make hires for some of the most difficult roles, right? And I only wanted to make money if we did that. I didn't want to build a product that sources to fill pipeline and is not landing on hires. So what we've done is really gone after, can we build a system that automates as much of the flow test to make a hire at the end of the day? I think that's the biggest thing, right? We're brought in to recruit, not to source a ton of candidates that don't accept the job. I need to fill a job at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I love that idea of an outcomes-based analysis of the value of a tool or workflow. If you spend all this time and energy doing something that is fun, tinkery, projecty, bleeding edge, another motivation is why are we doing this? Because we work in tech and our stakeholders are engineers and they're asking to build AI into all of the business operations, or they are building AI themselves. This is a self-preservation move, I think, for a lot of folks, and why we're talking about it so much on LinkedIn is because people are realizing, oh, I need to speak the language of the business. And what is the language of the business? Science, technology, engineering. And that's why AI is moving so fast in recruiting tech. Before we have legal precedent determined by the courts on current, open, active lawsuits that will define what an automated decision system is or is not. So, right now, recruiters, whether they're buying AI or building AI, they're still just making a decision on how much risk they want to take on. An agency can take on a certain amount of risk versus a company. But I want to talk about risk in terms of what leadership is asking and celebrating. So if leadership is asking for an internal recruiter and they're celebrating this idea of vibe code tools, go figure it out, use Claude, build these automations. The challenging piece here is when it comes to outreaching candidates, much of this activity and much of this software violates LinkedIn's terms and conditions, including the automation of any activity on LinkedIn. So we're talking about like the funnel. If you used to have to send 1,000 messages to get an engineer hired, and now you can do it in 100, and you've got your automated workflow, whether you built it or bought it, you're still violating the T&Cs of LinkedIn. And we saw this, what, a year and a half, 2 years ago when Apollo got shut down and kicked off. So LinkedIn, Microsoft, they've got a lot of fish to fry. They're not worried about some like recruiter at a Series C tech company vibe coding some tools, running some automation with Clay and HeyReach on behalf of their founder or on behalf of their VPE. But a recruiter is going to have to make a decision. Is this worth the risk to have my potential LinkedIn account, my name, get scrubbed from the platform or booted or suspended? Because we've seen this. And when in-house recruiters are going through so many different roles in their position, they're going through layoffs, like the startup that they're at now, like it might not be worth the entire LinkedIn repo that they've built for their personal brand to then get flagged or booted from the platform because their leadership wanted to see them vibe code or automate some outreach. Is that on the money? Have you seen anything like this?
I think you have to be very thoughtful of it. I've actually, and it's not just in recruiting, I've seen a few different platforms that promise that they either message candidates through InMail, maybe they'll add LinkedIn connections for you. We actually steer away from that because I'm super thoughtful, right? I love LinkedIn. LinkedIn is how we connected. It's how I share my business. It's how I stay connected through my network, right? I've been on LinkedIn probably since just right out of college, right? My core network is very much through LinkedIn. So when it comes to like what's the most valuable thing in my career, it's probably my LinkedIn. It's my profile, it's my brand, right? So like we don't want to touch that at all. So some people have asked like why we don't send LinkedIn emails. It's like because LinkedIn doesn't want us to. We want to be very careful about that. They'll ask, are you just scraping LinkedIn? And it's like, no, we're not. There's other sources to make sure that like we're trying to be as thoughtful about like who we're interacting with, but we do have to be very careful. I am nervous about golly. I think I've talked to more recruiters that are getting blocked for a few days from LinkedIn. They're a lot more thoughtful about like whether you're using extensions, right? Like this could even be a gem that's now starting to get flagged by LinkedIn. I think we have to tiptoe and be thoughtful and work with LinkedIn, but I hope ultimately that LinkedIn sees it as an opportunity to help companies be more agile, right? Because at the end of the day, LinkedIn is like it's the platform we all have to leverage. It's every recruiter's kind of go-to, but they also can be the barrier between opportunity for people. So I hope that LinkedIn finds a way to work with other small businesses that are finding a way to leverage, whether it's their community. I don't know how they want to tiptoe into sharing the data. I think there is a little bit of back and forth on like who owns some of this people data, but I don't know. We tiptoe, we make sure that we don't make them upset or cross over any lines. And I think that as you're vibe coding, you do have to be careful of it, right? I think that's the differentiator is my CTO has a deep background in systems and reliability and security, and he is taking a whole lot of thought about how we're managing data, what we're doing with resumes that we bring in. So I think you have to be really thoughtful about that. Maybe a little less unless you're building a product you want to sell and that's competing with LinkedIn. That's why I think we're also just not trying to compete with LinkedIn. We're not competing with the juice boxes. We found a different lane. And for us, it's a little bit more of how do we operate as efficiently as possible with LinkedIn? So yeah, I think you've got to be careful. I don't know if LinkedIn's the people you want to go to battle with on how we hire. They're ultimately like they built the world that we play in for as recruiters. So yeah, you've got to be thoughtful. I am a little nervous, but I honestly hope that like eventually we all end up on the same page because at the end of the day, we're all like this is driving America's economy, right? Like recruiters are how people find new opportunity and find their job. So I think LinkedIn ultimately wants to enable people. We just have to make sure that we're doing it thoughtfully.
One of the tropes in the sourcing community a few years back would be that like any tool is just scraping LinkedIn for the data. That's just not the case anymore. There are far more data providers, and this data is coming from various sources. There's even a lot of people saying that like much of the third party data brokers that operate offshore in like the shadows are getting a lot of this data from Calendly, from all of our like
Interesting.
calendar APIs. So it's not just saying that like it's not what we used to think in sourcing where we thought somebody built a LinkedIn shadow database offshore. That's just not how it works anymore. And as we think about sourcing itself evolving, how have you evolved as a sourcer beyond simple Boolean and in-text and in-file and insight commands?
Sure, I do have to be careful about sharing some of the sauce in our machine, but like even what you touched on right before is that it's not that we're just like, hey, we're not a give me 800 million profiles of data, right? I don't need 800 million. I need the profiles that can get my jobs. So we're actually very deep into. I was just talking to Kevin at Liquid, and I want to use him as an example. I'm doing a lot of ML and AI on the edge, right? Like he's doing a lot of his work going through research papers, right? Like maybe he's going through GitHub projects. And I think that's what we're seeing is that you do have to be a little bit more creative. To hire in some of these niche spaces, it's not just, can I just do volume through a LinkedIn? It's a little bit like, how do I find those communities, right? Whether you're a Web3 recruiter and you need to be on Twitter. I think you're seeing a lot more dinners. Can VCs bring together technical talent? Can they bring together product leaders? I actually think there's a bit of a rise of in person. That's especially with San Francisco, right? Like
Well, yeah.
to jump into that community, you had to go out there and be in that energy and meet with people in person. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. It's just, it's not the traditional, let me keep reaching out to the same community and nurture the 10 people that are gold. I think it becomes like, you have to start working your magic as a recruiter, right? I can have a founder that says, hey, Bryan, I need somebody with Rust experience that'll do 5 days in office in San Francisco. And it's like, hey, let's go after that. We'll find the 3,000 people that have this skill set. But after we've interacted with that, now is it a waiting game or do we want to start to expand those filters? Can we find somebody that's just exploring Rust? Can we find somebody that's in Marin that'll commute 3 days in office? Can we find somebody in Oregon that'll fly down, right? Can we find somebody just out of college? So I think it really ends up like you need to massage the parameters as opposed to like, I think we're used to just saying, okay, engineering wants this, we're going to keep hammering in this direction forever. I think now even more, we know when a market is exhausted. And I think that's one of the big things for us is like, I can see every software engineer that has data infrastructure experience in Wisconsin. And now I know, hey, if you're only looking to hire in this state, there's only 800 people that we can interact with that have experience. What do we want to do? So I think a lot of it is now, it's not just like this AI tooling is helping us bring more research to the table, but now we have to be even more of a partner to our hiring managers to let them know what we're seeing and what to expect for this search. And I think a lot of our work in Magic is massaging hiring managers' expectations of, hey, I know we want this perfect profile, but it's going to take us 3 months to wait for somebody to quit their job. How important is that trade-off? And sometimes you wait, and I'm completely fine with that. But for people that are like, hey, actually, Bryan, we need to hire in a month or our business is going to fail, or like this is a bit of a, how do we get to market faster than our competitors? Sometimes you have to be a bit more flexible.
And I think about those types of trade-offs as the funnel itself. I'm obsessed with pass-through rates, yield ratios. When you talk about having like 800 people in one geo and that's where they can hire from, I think like the conversation for me would be to the hiring manager like, okay, let's look at the headcount plan. Let's look at the product roadmap. We might be able to crank campaigns and get a 10% interested rate, but you've got X amount in the headcount plan. Like that makes this really competitive. How can we cascade those hires or potentially delay hiring while we network and build relationships with those so that we're getting a 25% interested rate? And then we can start talking about interview cycles. But especially if you're looking for somebody niche, This goes back to this idea of folks not really moving a ton right now. People in startups are sitting tight, they're vesting. Overall comp is down. So, what does that mean if they were getting roles at 75th percentile, 90th percentile comp in 2023? Now they're not really interested in moving for 50th percentile comp because the market recalibrated the cost of the skills in the labor market. But there's also this other idea that I was thinking about yesterday, and this was like one of those shower thoughts. Like recruiters, we love a challenge. I love working a rec. I love the idea of going out and poaching somebody. I can count on one hand the number of inbound hires I've made in the last 5 or 6 years, as I'm sure you can. But here's the thing, it's also if it's harder, if like really talented folks in that like mid level or like senior level like aren't moving, can we also just take a minute to put this shit in perspective and pat recruiters on the back? If you and I are both recruiting in San Francisco and like I'm trying to poach the people you placed 2 to 3 years ago and they're not responding and they're not moving, that's like good. You did a good job. You sold them on something that they would be motivated and engaged to do. So let's zoom out for a second. And when we think about those 1,600 recruiters in SF that are left that you posted about, let's just give them a pat on the back. It's harder because we're all awesome.
Yeah. Because I think that's what we forget, right? Is that, and also even a lot of these hires that are being made, some of them are backfills, right? So it doesn't always translate to just scaling an engineering organization. It is, but I will challenge on that is that like, yes, we are having engineers that are not moving as quickly in San Francisco. But I also think San Francisco is such a unique market because I think I saw something that like is going to be 1,000 times more AI startups than SaaS startups. And a chunk of them are in San Francisco. We're not getting 1,000 times more engineers, right? But I will say is like, we've had our most successful months over the last 3 months, more than we ever have. I think we're just a team of 2 and we had 6 accepts last month. And I think that's a reflection of just being more thoughtful about the markets we are going after, right? Like we've actually stepped a little bit out of San Francisco. Like we still do take on a bunch of San Francisco searches, but we understand it's the most competitive space in the US right now. So if we can take on remote roles, hire in Boulder, Los Angeles, New York City, Nashville, like San Francisco is the most competitive market in the world, but there's still talent and outliers. The question is, can you find those? And that's what I like to live on, right? Just because so many of us are fighting for that VC-backed Stanford grad with 4 to 7 years of experience. I've made some awesome like 13-year engineering hires. Can we find a recent grad that really hits that, right? So I think it still comes back to, I think if you're so narrowed into, I need this 4 to 7 years of perfect profile, it's not what you're hiring a little bit based on like what you know in the past and what success is based on like probably a smaller view. I think if you really understand interviewing and qualifying talent, I don't think a lot of that matters.
Yeah. And I feel like that's like the classic going to a hiring manager and they're like, all right, Bryan, we want somebody with 5 years experience from top 20 CS school that worked at a pre-series C startup.
And
Like,
you're
okay.
asking, what you're trying to do is use somebody else's signal that somebody's great. I think what you need to do is find out what's great to you and then qualify that candidate based on that. And that's why when we go back to like how we're leveraging AI tooling, I actually think it's a lot less about like automating the heck out of it. It's for us, it's a lot more about removing the human bias. Is that like I can tell you is that I've tried to hire from Cisco for 14 years and I struggled and I was like, man, maybe these people are too big tech for the companies I'm working for. The last year, I had a customer hire a Cisco candidate, and they're like, "This is the strongest candidate we've ever hired." So a lot of times, just our biases get in the way as well.
And my bias, honestly, can be that I love an underdog. I love somebody that comes from a non-traditional background, that's got a chip on their shoulder, that has something to prove, that the role is a step up for them, both in responsibility, in comp, maybe in industry, maybe in company impact. Because those are the things on a post-hire outcome that I've tracked where it's like, that random person that was selling insurance and they got their first SDR job and they came in and they were just like freaking crushing it as an SDR because they didn't want to sell insurance. Or a network administrator who worked in like some, I don't know, like legacy industry, like broadband or something. And they got to work in SaaS. They're stoked. It's not always about just nurturing this profile that has been nurtured their entire lives since they were math Olympiad champions. And there's a time and place for like top 20 CS hiring. But when we think about talent mapping and talent density, it's often just a proxy deferral to that company's hiring process. You're building a fintech payments platform. You hire a bunch of people from Stripe. You're really just doing what Stripe's hiring process was for the signal they looked for. And when I think about this idea of outcomes, I want to go back to something you said about evaluating tools and workflows. When we think about the value of a tool or a specific process, we need to understand if it's successful by some measure. That success measure for hiring is often cost per hire by source. So, for example, if we use a search firm and they charge us 25% bill rate for our top level senior engineers, that's a pretty high expense, but it's worth it to the business. And there's a cost associated with that. If we then start to use software tools like these AI sourcing tools that are running $200 a month, cancel anytime, those products are built upon AI API calls to the frontier AI LLM labs. Those tokens, the cost of tokens, are currently subsidized, just like Uber was subsidized. Remember when you could drive across San Francisco for $8? It was a subsidized cost. We're living in this same world. So when we think about putting a metric on the outcome of some of these emerging tools and vibe coded tools, it's not the actual cost. And that concerns me. And I don't see anybody really talking about that.
Yeah, I think the assumption is that the cost is going to come down, though. I don't think that you're going to be on your $20 OpenAI or ChatGPT subscription, and all of a sudden they're going to jump that to $600. I think we're going to find ways to be able to even my engineer thinks a lot about how do we make sure that we're not just like with AWS, right? Like, how do you just make sure you're running efficiently? How do you make sure you're not pulling the same data over and over again? I think that we're going to find that with vibe coders, right? Is that when they're not building systems that are efficient, right? Now, every time they pull or hit an API, it's going to make a cost, right? But I think what does become important is having an engineer that can make sure you're efficient. And that's why when we talk about this talent engineer, I think it's a little bit more of, if you look at Biet's, he made a blog about that and what he was thinking. And in that, one of his engineers reaches out and is like, hey, this is what I've been building, right? A go-to-market engineer had already started to build these for them and then said, hey, how do we meet somewhere in the middle? And I think that's what the results need to be, is having a true full stack engineer that wants to build products, working closely with the recruiter and saying, cool, what do we do? As opposed to, I don't think you can push it off on one side. You can't just leave an engineer in a dark room and just say, solve recruiting for me. And then you can't have a recruiter building completely. So I think we need to meet somewhere in the middle.
But it's funny how many folks in SF will tell you they're solving recruiting and fixing recruiting, especially folks that have never had a job. Or it's like somebody who's never worked a rec. It's
Well,
cool.
you understand the pain point, and I think where that comes from is that I think it's an awesome team. I talked to a bunch of recent YC. They've gone through YC. They're solving recruiting, and I'm like, great. What are you building? And often it's a recent grad that struggled to find a job, or they see there's a lot that's broken in recruiting. I think it's hard to now think about boiling the ocean. What I challenge people to do is, I've met a few and I'm like, what are you doing? It's like, we're building AI to hire some certain skill set. And I'm like, well, is that hard to hire for? That's why I like the route we've gone through, is that we really think that you're not solved, but we're going at how do we solve a difficult problem. And for us, it's hiring engineers, product managers, some of the more competitive roles. But yeah, it's very interesting to see when somebody's like, great, we're solving recruiting. And then we dive deeper into what they're solving. And you're using job postings too. And it's like, but I understand. But then when you think about it from an early stage standpoint, is that if you're a startup, you post a job, nobody gives a shit. If you're Uber and you post a job, awesome. Now you can filter through that. But if I run a 5-person startup, as sexy as it is, nobody's applying. And you know it, right? I was at Apple and I was like, oh, I did. And it's not a reflection of talent. It's a reflection of an easy apply to now we just get bombarded with. I think when I was at Google, I think there was something like 30,000 job applicants we had to comb through. And that's just an impossible task to do.
Yeah. And you just skim the top basis point off the top, send them through the assessment. Next thing they're an L4 engineer.
Yeah. Right. And log in. Yes, no.
And then but let's be honest, then you also had probably a recruiting manager or talent partner that did the intake. You had a sourcer that filled the pipe, maybe. You had a recruiting coordinator that did all of the interview prep and scheduling. And then I've even seen in some business groups at Google where they bring in a closer that is not the recruiter that brought them through to remove the psychological game of recruiters caving to negotiations. Candidate closes an offer with a complete stranger in their offer call. I think there's just a lot of different ways to hire, and there's no recruiting emergency room or recruiting jail. There's no right or wrong way to do this. It all goes back to what you said, the right workflow for the right client that you are serving in the right type of recruiting dynamic, whether it's in-house, agency contingent, embedded. There's just so many different ways. Thinking about the market and going back to what you said, talking to some of these early founders is every few years, there's a wave of VCs that are like, we're going to solve this. I'm a big believer that people are smart. Investors spend a lot of money and have wasted a lot of money trying to solve this. I think recruiting is far too complex and far too much a human craft that cannot be quantified, that the over-index on science and the over-index on process and automation has already proven that this problem could and should have already been solved because on paper, it's so easy. That's why everybody wants to build. That's why YC gives 22-year-old people money to go build. That's why Sequoia or somebody will give tons of money to a startup that's developed some market traction. Maybe they got to $5 million, $10 million, they got 1,000 customers. I fundamentally think that if this was solvable, we would all have already solved it. We've solved way harder things with technology.
Yeah, I think also recruiters are very finicky, right? More than any skill set, right? If you're an accountant, you grew up on Excel, you knew the systems that you were going to build your career on, right? You get very good with a certain skill set of tools, right? We're probably one of the few industries that's like, there's no rule book. Most of it, I was selling cars for enterprise rent a car before I started recruiting, right? Not many of us are coming from traditional HR backgrounds. Maybe we're coming from sales, right? There's no playbook into like how to crush recruiting, right? A lot of it is being empathetic, having skills and listening, being able to research, understand the skill, and then being agile, right? Like how quickly can you pivot? Like that's why for us calibration is big, not just search, but also what we quickly want to do is introduce candidates and then get that feedback and understand actually from that first group of candidates, where are we going right or wrong? And then where do we go from here? I think a lot of the AI tooling is you still need human in the loop for so much of this. It's such a human process. So I think you're spot on, right? Is that because it's such a human flow, that LinkedIn profile or resume can't capture what somebody's passionate about or where they're at. You could have a beautiful profile and then now you're drained and don't want to actually work for 2 years. Great, we can't do anything. And I work on a lot of DevOps infrastructure roles, and those people have terrible looking LinkedIn profiles and resumes, but it's just how the space is. I think, unfortunately, because we don't have enough data to make decisions in our space, we have to chat with more people. And that's a lot of what we've tried to scale up, right? Is like, it's a lot less on how do I make sure I reach out to the perfect profile. And it's more about how do I chat with enough of the right people so it gets me in the direction and I can learn, right? So maybe I chat with a infrastructure engineer that's doing more work on GCP. And actually, I need somebody that does AWS. But in that call, he's like, hey, but my counterpart just got laid off. He's the perfect person for you. So I think what we're really trying to get to is like, how do we have the right conversations and the right interactions and go down the right rabbit holes that get us in the right direction? The last thing we want, and I think it's so hard to track because like you can have a sourcer that knows exactly the right ways to go. I used to work at an ML driven hedge fund. We were often recruiting from like IMCL and like these research papers, right? And I can spend days and days going down these like who's different PhDs and research papers. But if I don't reach out to them, if I can't find their email, if I don't interact with them the right way, if I don't nurture those conversations right, where does that get me? So that's why I think we still want to anchor on, can we make a hire? And like, success does have to be a bit of the end goal, but you're spot on. Is like, how do you now predict that workflow? That's why we've taken a step back and said, like, there was a time where I thought that, hey, I can build a repeatable system that solves every search firm's problem. Now I think it's a little bit more, hey, we kind of have to be a little bit in the same operating realm and we have to have a similar workflow. And hey, I can show you pieces of this, but at the end of the day, that's why I think like for us, it's really looking at our flow and how do we build efficiencies into that as opposed to boiling the whole ocean of solving everybody's recruiting problem. I think that's where you're going to find some of these products get in trouble, is that with venture backing, you need to have a $1 billion idea. And I think to build something that encompasses and solves everybody's problem, it gets really tough. And I think that's what we're going to find some of the recruiting products with the larger rounds run into. But I hope they figure it out. I assume they will.
And that right there, sir, is why Subgraph is inevitable.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to get us out on here on time, but before I do, life is too short not to work on cool problems with interesting people. Recruiting has allowed me to do both, and I just love sourcing. Before I got into recruiting, I used to buy and resell Jordans and Air Maxes and Supreme, and this is before modern internet and before reselling platforms. So we used to sell on forums, scrape the web to find out what people wanted to buy or what people were selling, look at serial numbers and run searches on the internet for retail shops that had an early e-commerce site to find that random sneaker store in Kansas City that had an extra pair of Jordans or whatever. When I found out we could do this with humans on the internet for sourcing, I was hooked. And one of my favorite sourcing cool stories is Google's FooBar program, where if you search something into Google that was niche enough, you got invited to interview at Google. And have you heard of any of these cool ways companies are hiring right now for technical talent, where if they're doing some activity on the internet, whether it's GitHub or elsewhere, that they're getting this kind of backdoor invitation the way Google did FooBar?
I don't know any. I think I saw that Listen Labs may have made a billboard to solve a problem. I think that's interesting. I don't have something super cool. What I am finding is I have a early stage company I support called Equip. They're down here in LA and they build a sports data platform. And one thing that their founders really love is somebody interested in sports. We just helped them hire an engineer that played basketball at MIT. Right. So I think things like that is like, how do we know that you're so passionate about a space? When I was at Boosted Boards, an electric skateboard company, but I hired an intern that had built an electric surfboard, you're already going down that route and solving a problem. So I think in that vein, how do you find somebody that's so passionate about going down those rabbit holes? And I'm right there with you. Give me 1 second. I got some undefeated Kobe's. And you've got these fives too. And I've got some Travis Scotts that are getting a little beat, but probably the closest thing I can find. But I'm right there with you.
And Tom Sachs today.
But yeah, I love the Tom Sachs. Those are awesome. They just released another color, I think like a day or two ago. But I like the OGs. And then they had the brown pair as well.
Oh, yeah. We should talk sneakers. It's funny. It's always funny. This is exactly it. It's exactly it. I will know forever that Bryan Lee knows sneakers. And when you pick up this stuff from the internet, it's like there's so many recruiters I know that are sneakerheads, and the same goes for talent. If you hit somebody up and you know they're a sneakerhead, like it's impossible for them not to respond.
I'm so much of a sneakerhead. I was on Nike Park and shoe trends and like selling Jordans off of like eBay in 8th grade. We were living this for a while. And then my older brother and my cousin, they went really deep. They were selling like thousands of shoes. I'm a basketball player, so I just like basketball shoes for the most part.
Yeah. And when I was doing stuff, I was just like trying to make $1,000 a month, like buying and selling the stuff that I would bear, like one to rock, one to stock. Or I would like use the money that I'd make $100 on something to pay for the pair that I wanted. But it's interesting to folks that have actually gamified and scaled like sneaker reselling. We could do a whole conversation around that. But Bryan, this has been
on the other side. I don't want to resell anything. I don't want to make any money off shoes. I'm like, I'll buy mine. If I get an extra pair, I give them to friends. For retail, It's nice to not have to pay rent off of it.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And now what I'm doing is Gen Z loves thrifted stuff. So I run like a killer Depop store that's literally just my closet for stuff that I've worn. So if the sneakers are $100, I'll beat them, turn around, sell them for 35, and like some kid in LA is buying $35 Tom Sachs.
That's
And it's
awesome.
like, okay, sure. I can like just
But I love that in the core of, I think if we're going to buy all this stuff, my partner, we've got a 2-year-old, we constantly having have stuff come in the house. And I'm like, but she hates that I'm so quick to find something on the sidewalk and like, hey, can we reuse this? So I actually love thrifted clothes, like recycling things. I find like a slide outside for my daughter. I'll clean it up. And we're playing with this today.
yeah, it's so true. I love it. And that's funny because that's the shoe that Tom Sachs just did, bricolage. The concept of bricolage means like using something for a different purpose.
I love that.
And I love this creative way that we can hopefully build a more circular economy and still express ourselves through how cool you look draining threes at your pickup basketball game.
Yeah, I will say that's like what, even as one of the things I want to get into next is like, I've noticed, and it's like 20% of our hires last year were sourced for different roles. So in that repurposing thought, right? We interact with such great talent, even when they're not a great fit for one role, where else where they be a best fit for? So working on like, how do we build solutions to help make sure that candidates can see other opportunities that we're working on, or even some of our partner firms as well.
I love that. Bryan, let's get out of here. How can people stay up to date with what you're building at Subgraph?
Sure. Yeah. You can find me on LinkedIn at Bryan Lee. You can also go to subgraph.tech. We just updated our website and you can take a look at it and message me there.
Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yes, of course. I appreciate the invite. This is awesome. I've been such a fan of your conversations with recruiters and giving us a voice. This is awesome. I don't listen to a ton of podcasts, but I really made it a point, especially with some of the guests you're bringing on. So you're crushing.
Thanks, Bryan. Let's stay close.
Awesome. See you, Brandon.